Well, initially, it felt like nothing was happening. So she was released towards the end of 2010, and through the early, really about 6 months of 2011, there was very, very little going on that suggested there was anything other than just allowing her to be out of house arrest. So that was good. And she was allowed visitors and people were able to come and see her. But she seemed to have no contact with the military at all. So it was almost like you can be released, but you're just going to be sidelined. But then they did reach out to her around the summer of 2011. And that was a really interesting moment because she called me and my American and French colleagues in to see her at her house in University Avenue. And she asked us to brief our governments and groups back in our respective countries that the military had reached out to her. She didn't know if this was a false step and that this was just window dressing, but she was of the view that it might be more than that. So she asked us to try to ensure that the reaction back, in my case, in the UK, was not to dismiss these talks as another attempt to pull the wool over people's eyes by the military, but instead actually just don't say anything about it. Just say, okay, well, we'll see how they go. And that turned out to be the beginning of the process that led to the opening up, which really gathered pace through the latter half of 2011 and then into 2012.
There was, though, always an accommodation with the military as that process kind of unfolded. How do you think Aung San Suu Kyi and the NLD handled that? Did they understand what they were up against, or were they perhaps as naive as we might say the rest of the world now was?
No, I don't think they were naive. I mean, I spoke a lot to Aung San Suu Kyi at this time and our NLD colleagues, and they took the view that there was a chance that this would be the real thing, even with the restrictions that the military had placed. As you'll know, they drafted a constitution that retained 25% of the parliament for military placemen. They blocked her being able to become the president, and they'd retained key jobs for military figures. So she knew all that, but she thought that the people I'm talking to do appear to be sincere. So this is a gamble worth trying. And frankly, up until this coup, it looked like that gamble had paid off. You know, we had the free and fair elections in 2015. And then again, the elections were run in a free and fair way in 2020. And, well, we all know what happened on the 1st of February to turn that around. But I don't think she was naive about it. I think she knew there was a risk, but she thought this was a risk worth running.
But at the time that constitution was written and publicly declared, many people raised questions about whether the military was serious about giving up power. What was the motivation, do you think, of any kind of change at that time? Because they clearly weren't entirely serious about giving up power.
The economy was in a desperate state. Without China's economic, not to mention diplomatic backing, the Burmese economy would have fallen apart. I think also as part of their membership of ASEAN, ministers have started to travel and seen countries that Myanmar had probably considered itself to be more advanced than were racing ahead of Burma. And they probably saw enough to make them realize what a backwater in terms of the economy Myanmar had become. I think there was also a frustration at the country's pariah status. You know, that had been going on. You'll be aware of all the sanctions regimes that were in place. So I think there was a sense of a whole range. There were other factors too, but these are just a few of the ones that were talked about. That there was a thought, well, could we move out of this? But they clearly hedged their bets. And they hedged their bets not only in what they did with the constitution, but we now know that some members of the military were hedging their bets to the point that, well, you know, if this doesn't go the way that we want, we'll just reverse this whole thing.